Meanwhile, Jim Chalmers was also boasting this morning. They're having a very boastful morning, Labor, aren't they? That the government had cut migration numbers quite considerably. But after his math on power bills, would you really believe him?
International student market is an important earner for Australia, but it needs to be responsible. We need to make sure that we're managing that. That's why we've taken the steps, or trying to take the steps that we are taking. Overall, we're managing the program down. We're doing that in a considered and methodical way, and you'll see that in the numbers.
What? Yeah, do you believe it? Net migration peaked at a record 556,000 people in the year to September 2023, and it did fall to 379,000 in the last 12 months, but that's still a lot of extra people coming to this country in the middle of a housing crisis.
It sure is, and Chalmers said the government would continue to manage net migration down, but refused to give specifics ahead of Tuesday's budget. James, this issue was not front and centre from both sides at the last election. And here we are now with a record number of migrants coming into this country since Labor was elected. But the reality is that nobody ever voted for a big Australia. Nobody did. And yet here we are with a big Australia. Now, despite Labor pledging to cut the number of arrivals, there were new figures released this week that say, OK, fine, perhaps it is coming down, but it's still above pre-pandemic levels. Yeah. And the reality is that the target which Labor put, they actually revised it up, which means that we're going to have about another 100,000 people in this country. Where are we going to put these 100,000 people? We can't even find homes for everyday Aussies. Rents are going up, cost of living crisis, and we've got to find more homes for 100,000 extra people, plus the congestion on the roads. Labor have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to migration. But I've got to say, the coalition, I think, have been particularly weak on this as well. You know, this should be front and centre for the coalition. Go big, sell it hard, put caps in place. But don't go for a small target, because something has to be done with this cost of living crisis.
It'll be interesting when we talk to Aaron Patrick later in the program about whether or not Peter Dutton needs to go bigger, because it's like the coalition had all the momentum and suddenly the wind has just gone out of their sails, and they seem to be floundering a little bit. So that is something I want to ask him later in the program. Does Peter Dutton need to be bolder? But when you listen to Jim Chalmers there talk about immigration numbers, and did you notice he obfuscates? He doesn't give specifics. He talks about the fact that, quote unquote, figures show a cooling trend. What does cooling trend even mean? He says the trajectory is down, and then he said, and that's being deliberate. Well, yeah, it ought to be deliberate. We expect you to take responsibility for immigration numbers, but it's hard to believe the government is serious when you get things like they're promising to reduce net migration, but they take in 3,000 Gazan refugees, more than any other nation in the world. Why would you do that when the goal is get the numbers down? We had a record number of international students arrive in February. On top of that, there's 100,000 international students right now who have been given bridging visas so they can extend their stay. And on top of that, we've got another 25,000 international students currently tying up the courts, trying to use different legal loopholes to stay in this country. All of those things are things that this government could address if they were serious, but instead we've got the Federal Treasurer saying, you know, there's a cooling trend and we've got to guess what that means. Well, we know what it means. It's difficult to get a rental. All government services are difficult to access because there are so many people trying to access them. We expect the government to do something, and instead we just get zigging and zagging and obfuscation.
But a migration policy like Labor has been running, it suits Labor politically,
of course
James,
it does.
right? But also it adds to this Ponzi scheme economy because it's easy for the Treasurer to come out and say, look, we're not in a recession. Well, if we didn't have this high migration, we would indeed be in this recession.
Which is why they say one thing, but they do another.
That's it. But everything has gone up as a result. And, of course, inflation stayed higher for longer, and it should have come down a lot quicker. So it's politically, it has suited Labor for sure.
Yeah. What's interesting is to work out whether people are aware of all of this and onto it, or whether they can get away with it.
Yeah.